Good morning. Today is November 9, 2016. I'd like to begin today's show with a moment of silence. Thank you for listening to Map Facts, Environmental Impact Hour. The first segment of our show, we'll discover an excerpt from They Thought They Were Free, The Germans, 1933 through 45, by Milton Mayer, from a chapter titled, But Then It Was Too Late. What no one seemed to notice, said a colleague of mine, a philologist, was the ever-widening gap, just after 1933, between the government and the people. Just think how very wide this gap was to begin with. Here in Germany, it always became wider. You know, it doesn't make people closer to their government to be told that this is a people's government, a true democracy, or to be enrolled in civilian defense, or even to vote. All this has little, really nothing to do with knowing one is governing. What happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise, to receiving decisions deliberated in secret, to believing the situation was so complicated that the government had to act on information which the people could not understand, or so dangerous that, even if the people could not understand it, it could not be released because of national security. In their sense of identification with Hitler, their trust in him made it easier to widen this gap, and reassured those who would otherwise have worried about it. This separation of government from people, this widening of the gap, took place so gradually and so insensibly, each step disguised, perhaps not even intentionally, as a temporary emergency measure, or associated with true patriotic allegiance, or with real social purposes. And all the crises and reforms, real reforms too, so occupied the people that they did not see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. You will understand me when I say that my Middle High German was my life. It was all I cared about. I was a scholar, a specialist. Then suddenly I was plunged into all the new activity as the university was drawn into the new situation. Meetings, conferences, interviews, ceremonies, and, above all, papers to be filled out, reports, bibliographies, lists, questionnaires, and on top of that were the demands in the community, the things in which one was expected to participate, that had not been there or had not been important before. It was all rigmarole, of course, but it consumed all one's energies, coming on top of the work one really wanted to do. You can see how easy it was, then, not to think about fundamental things. One had no time. Those, I said, are the words of my friend the baker. One had no time to think. There was so much going on. Your friend the baker was right, said my colleague. The dictatorship, and the whole process of its coming into being, was above all diverting. It provided an excuse not to think for people who did not want to think anyway. I do not speak of your little men, your baker, and so on. I speak of my colleagues and myself. Learned men, mind you. Most of us did not want to think about fundamental things, and never had. There was no need to. Nazism gave us some dreadful, fundamental things to think about. We were decent people, and kept us so busy with continuous changes and crises, and so fascinated, yes, fascinated, by the machinations of the national enemies, without and within, that we had no time to think about these dreadful things that were growing, little by little, all around us. Unconsciously, I suppose we were grateful. Who wants to think? To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us ever had occasion to develop, each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained or, on occasion, regretted that, unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to. One no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. One day it is over his head. How is this to be avoided among ordinary men, even highly educated ordinary men? Frankly, I do not know. I do not see, even now. Many times since it all happened, I have pondered that pair of great maxims, principis obsta and finem respice. Resist the beginnings and consider the end. But one must foresee the end in order to resist, or even see the beginnings. One must foresee the end clearly and certainly, and how this is to be done by ordinary men or even extraordinary men. Things might have, and everyone counts on that might. Your little men, your Nazi friends, were not against National Socialism in principle. Men like me who are the greatest offenders, not because we knew better, that would be too much to say, but because we sensed better. Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself and said that when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, and so he did nothing. And then they attacked the socialists, and he was a little uneasier, but still, he was not a socialist, and he did nothing. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on, and he was always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a churchman, and he did something. But then it was too late. Yes, I said. You see, my colleague went on, one doesn't see exactly where or how to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for one great, shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you are not in the habit of doing it. And it is not just fear of standing alone, that restrains you. It is also genuine uncertainty. Uncertainty is a very important factor, and instead of decreasing as time goes on, it grows. Outside, in the streets, in the general community, everyone is happy. One hears no protests and certainly sees none. You know, in France or Italy, there would be slogans against the government painted on walls and fences. In Germany, outside the great cities perhaps, there is not even this. In the university community, in your own community, you speak privately to your colleagues, some of whom certainly feel as you do, but what do they say? They say, it's not so bad, or you're not seeing things, or you're an alarmist, and you are an alarmist. You are saying that this must lead to this, and you can't prove it. These are the beginnings, yes, but how do you know for sure when you don't know the end? And how do you know or even surmise the end? On the one hand, your enemies, the law, the regime, the party intimidate you. On the other, your colleagues poo-poo you as a pessimist, or even neurotic. You are left with your close friends who are, naturally, people who have always thought as you have. But your friends are fewer now. Some have drifted off somewhere or submerged themselves in their work. You no longer see as many as you did at meetings or gatherings. Informal groups become smaller. Attendance drops off in little organizations, and the organizations themselves wither. Now, in small gatherings of your oldest friends, you feel that you are talking to yourselves, that you are isolated from the reality of things. This weakens your confidence still further, and serves as a further deterrent to what? It is clear all the time that if you are going to do anything, you must make an occasion to do it. And then you are obviously a troublemaker, so you wait, and you wait. But the one great shocking occasion when tens or hundreds or thousands will join you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and the worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and the smallest, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 43 had come immediately after the German firm stickers on the windows of non-Jewish shops in 33. But of course, this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. Step C is not so much worse than Step B, and if you do not make a stand at Step B, then why should you at Step C, and so on to D? And one day, too late, your principles, if you are ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident, in my case, my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, "Jewish swine," collapses all at once. And you see that everything has changed, and changed completely under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, is not the world you were born into at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring. The houses, the shops, the jobs, the mealtimes, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never notice because you were made with the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is changed. Now you live in a world of fear and hate, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. Now you live in a system which rules without responsibility even to God. The system itself could not have intended this in the beginning, but in order to sustain itself, it was compelled to go all the way. You have gone almost all the way yourself. Life is a continuing process, a flow, not a succession of acts or events at all. It has flowed to a new level, carrying you with it, without any effort on your part. On this new level you live. You have been living more comfortably every day, with new morals, new principles. You have accepted things you would not have accepted 5 years ago, a year ago, things that your father, even in Germany, could not have imagined. Suddenly it all comes down, all at once. You see what you are, what you have done, or more accurately, what you haven't done. For that was all that was required of most of us, that we do nothing. You remember those early meetings of your department in the university when, if one had stood, others would have stood, perhaps, but no one stood. A small matter, a matter of hiring this man or that, and you hired this one rather than that. You remember everything now, and your heart breaks. Too late. You are compromised beyond repair. What then? You must then shoot yourself. A few did, or adjust your principles. Many tried, and some, I suppose, succeeded. Not I, however, or learn to live with the rest of your life with your shame. This last is the nearest there is, under the circumstances, to heroism. Shame. Many Germans became this poor kind of hero, many more, I think, than the world cares to know. I said nothing. I thought of nothing to say. I can tell you, my colleague went on, of a man in Leipzig, a judge. He was not a Nazi, except nominally, but he certainly wasn't an anti-Nazi. He was a judge, just a judge. In 42 or 43, early 43, I think it was, a Jew was tried before him in a case involving, but only incidentally, relations with a, quote, Aryan woman. This was, quote, race injury, something the party was especially anxious to punish. In the case at the bar, the judge had the power to convict the man of a non-racial offense and send him to an ordinary prison for a very long term, thus saving him from the party, quote, processing, which would have meant concentration camp or, more probably, deportation and death. But the man was innocent of the non-racial charge. In the judge's opinion, and as an honorable judge, he acquitted him. So, of course, the party seized the Jew as soon as he left the courtroom. And the judge? Yes, the judge. He could not get the case off his conscience. A case, mind you, in which he had acquitted an innocent man. He thought that he should have convicted him and saved him from the party. But how could he have convicted an innocent man? The thing preyed on him more and more, and he had to talk about it, first to his family, then to his friends, and then to his acquaintances. That's how I heard about it. After the 44 Munich Putsch, they arrested him, and after that, I don't know. I said nothing. Once the war began, my colleague continued. Resistance, protest, criticism, complaint, all carried with them a multiplied likelihood of the greatest punishment. Mere lack of enthusiasm or failure to show it in public was defeatism. You assumed that there were lists of those who would be, quote, dealt with later, after the victory. Goebbels was very clever here too. He continually promised a victory orgy to take care of those who thought that their treasonable attitude had escaped notice. And he meant it. That was not just propaganda. And that was enough to put an end to all uncertainty. Once the war began, the government could do anything, quote, necessary to win it. So it was with the final solution to the Jewish problem, which the Nazis always talked about but never dared undertake, not even the Nazis, until war and its necessities gave them the knowledge that they could get away with it. The people abroad who thought the war against Hitler would help the Jews were wrong. And the people in Germany who, once the war had begun, still thought of complaining, protesting, resisting, were betting on Germany's losing the war. It was a long bet. Not many made it. Missouri Accountability Project kicked off in 2015 as a platform of citizen advocacy for protection of environmental, public health, and safety. You can visit us at MissouriAccountabilityProject.org to find our objectives as follows. We urge the EPA to expedite implementation of grid analysis and full removal of all radiologically impacted material from operable Unit 1, 2, and 3 of Westlake Landfill in the 2016 Record of Decision, taking into account the National Remedy Review Board recommendation of such a decision and its cited feasibility. We demand either Congress, by way of House Bill 4100 on life support in committee, transfer jurisdiction of Westlake Landfill remediation to the United States Army Corps of Engineers with the aid of formerly utilized sites remedial action program for full removal of radiologically impacted material to a proper containment facility, or the President of the United States making so by way of executive order following the bipartisan, unanimously passed Senate bill version. And we also petition the current governor facilitate interagency emergency planning between St. Louis and St. Charles County by declaring state of emergency. I understand that some of these objectives may shift, they may fail, they may change direction, considering the results of Tuesday's election and the transference of power to a new administration. That in mind, Missouri Accountability Project will, over the next few months, reach out to all of the elected officials in our state and in our area to ask them to sign on to some of our objectives and to ask what they plan to do to address these issues. We'll air what phone calls we have available with those to have our officials on record stating their commitments. You can also go to our Facebook page and find the cross post that we shared from Just Moms STL. They had a candidate forum back in October to talk to all of the potential candidates in our area and how they might address Westlake Bridgeton landfill and other environmental issues. That's available through our Facebook page. If today's Thursday, maybe scroll down 4 or 5 posts and you'll find it. Some candidates chose to attend, some chose to send representatives in their place, some chose to offer a video of their platform. Like I said, you can find those there at facebook.com/Missouri Accountability Project or by searching Westlake Landfill. And since we're shifting back to climate and the environment in context with the recent elections, I want to share with you an article in the Scientific American by Evan Lehman, Ben Storrow, Daniel Kuzik, written November 9th, today, 2016. Donald Trump's surprise victory in the presidential race stunned climate advocates and threatens to unravel President Obama's policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and expand renewable energy. The Republican outsider flummoxed pollsters and analysts who predicted an easy win for Democrat Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, who pledged to slash the use of gasoline by a third and oversee an aggressive expansion of solar and wind energy. Trump, speaking to his supporters in New York City minutes before 3 a.m. Eastern Time, promised to, quote, bind the wounds of division caused by the deeply negative race when he becomes the 45th President of the United States in January. I pledge to every citizen that I will be a president to all Americans, Trump said. Clinton conceded the race in a phone call with Trump, but did not address the disappointed supporters gathered in New York City. Go home, John Podesta, her campaign chairman, told the crowd at 2 a.m. Trump's success suggests that the United States' commitment to a global climate agreement, which Obama signed in September, could be terminated. Trump advisors have in recent weeks been collecting options for taking those steps, perhaps on his first day in office. One idea involves submitting the agreement to the Senate for a vote, and that scenario might seem more attractive in the aftermath, since Republicans easily defended their control of that chamber. Another scenario could involve Trump erasing the nation's signature on the agreement. That's the fastest option, according to a source close to the campaign. If he wants to focus on the Paris Agreement on his first day, it's just a simple executive order to remove the signature, the source said. Trump has also pledged to repeal the Clean Power Plan, Obama's landmark regulation to cut carbon dioxide emissions in the electricity sector 32% over the next 13 years. The path toward ending that rule is less clear, but supporters anticipate that it will happen. They're also looking forward to Trump short-circuiting potential regulations, restricting methane emissions at natural gas facilities, and likely future rules on oil refineries and industrial facilities. Quote, Donald Trump has consistently said he wants to repeal the Clean Power Plan, said Chrissy Harbin, Director of Federal Affairs with Americans for Prosperity. I think he'd have a different approach on the regulatory space. Observers struggled to describe the likely redirection of the nation on the world stage under Trump. The United States played a key role in finalizing the Paris Agreement by, in part, striking a deal with China to limit its greenhouse gas emissions. A sudden reversal is now being anticipated in diplomatic circles. I think there's going to be a profound shock that our country, which has done so much to address the problem, has now turned its back on that, said Adam Rome, an environmental historian with the University at Buffalo. I think around the world that's going to send shockwaves, he added. Environmentalists reacted with disbelief to the upset victory of a candidate who rejects a scientific foundation for man-made climate change. Trump has called global warming a, quote, hoax, and described it as, quote, bullshit. His official position is that humans don't affect the climate. Greg Small, CEO of Climate Solutions, a nonprofit based in Washington State, said Trump will be, quote, devastating to efforts to limit temperature increases worldwide. There is no way to overstate the disaster this is for the world, Small said. It's honestly hard not to break down in tears at what this means for our planet. Other environmentalists felt whiplash. In the days before the election, Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org and supporter of Bernie Sanders, independent senator from Vermont, who ran against Clinton for the Democratic presidential nomination, was focused on pushing a possible Clinton administration to act more aggressively to address climate change. Now that would be a luxury. I think it does enormous damage to the national and global effort to slow down the planet's runaway heating, McKibben said in an email about Trump's victory. Asked if he worries about whether Trump's victory could send a signal to other Republican candidates that rejecting climate science is electorally tolerable, McKibben said, "Sure." Others might be wondering that too. Clinton and her surrogates consistently pointed to Trump's comments about climate change as evidence that he's a, quote, denier. It was a key strategy to turn out voters who are younger, women, and minorities. Climate pollsters might also be searching for answers. Research shows that registered voters are 3 times more likely to vote for a generic candidate who supports action to address global warming compared to one who doesn't. Faced with that decision in the real world, voters went the other way. Edward Maybach, director of George Mason University's Center for Climate Change Communication, which conducted the polling, said the climate issue plays too small a role in the election to affect the outcome. He said 5% of voters, at most, see global warming as a top-tier issue. So Trump's rejection of climate science likely got lost in the litany of issues raised during the sharply negative campaign, he said. That's one more ludicrous claim in a long list of ludicrous claims in this election, Maybach said of Trump's rejection of climate science. Even as polls showed a tightening race in Florida and North Carolina in recent weeks, Democrats pointed to a blue firewall in Virginia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania as likely evidence of a Clinton win. But in a sign of the unstable assumptions underpinning many election forecasts, much of that wall crumbled yesterday. Trump scored a tight win in Pennsylvania and flipped Wisconsin, a state that hasn't voted for a GOP nominee since 1984. Leading into the election, some Republicans expressed concern that Trump's position on climate science could expose the Republican Party to attacks. Now that he has proved those fears unwarranted, some conservatives wonder if the president-elect could make a deal on climate action. There could be some opportunity in that approach, said Jeremy Carl, a GOP energy advisor and researcher fellow at the Hoover Institution, of Trump's hardline position on climate. Quote, "You want to put a shiny new Trump Tower on Central West from a policy perspective, then maybe he'd be willing to trade something on climate that someone else wouldn't. But I don't think that's the most likely scenario." Democrats were just as stunned at their failure to retake control of the Senate. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin's victory could signal continued intransigence on climate change among lawmakers. Environmentalists have called Johnson one of the Senate's most reliable anti-climate votes, and many believe he would vote in favor of the United States exiting the Paris Accord. His Democratic opponent, former Senator Russ Feingold, criticized Johnson for failing to acknowledge the role of human activities in warming. Groups like the Sierra Club and the League for Conservation voters poured substantial energy and advertising dollars into the race over the final weeks of the campaign. It did not work. Among Johnson's top donors for the 2016 campaign cycle was Koch Industries Incorporated, the conglomerate owned by the politically active and conservative Koch brothers. The firm gave nearly $35,000 to Johnson's re-election campaign, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, Republican, himself a climate skeptic, tweeted a congratulatory message to Johnson after last night's results, saying that, quote, "Common sense Wisconsin values prevailed in this race, and we are proud to have your leadership." While they were thwarted in Wisconsin, green groups took heart in neighboring Illinois, where Democratic challenger Representative Tammy Duckworth decisively ousted incumbent Senator Mark Kirk, even though Kirk has been more supportive of climate initiatives than many of his peers. LCV President Gene Karpinski also praised the election of solar energy entrepreneur Raja Krishnamurthy to assume Duckworth's seat in the 8th District, calling him one of a number of, quote, "strong environmental allies who will fight tirelessly to protect public health, combat climate change, and grow our clean energy economy." Next, I would like to talk about our new Attorney General, Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from Lafayette County, I believe. Mr. Josh Hawley will be taking up the case put forth by current Attorney General Chris Koster's office against Republic Services over the contamination of groundwater at Westlake Landfill. Unfortunately, for the candidate forums for Westlake Landfill, Josh Hawley chose not to attend. He doesn't have really any experience legislating. Has not served any trials in a courtroom. So I will offer you a bit of his history here, since this will be an important case, and someone who we hope to put a great deal of pressure on in terms of this case. It's pretty important for us in the community. Sources, St. Louis Public Radio, Jason Rosenbaum. On October 13th, so this was before the election, the Lexington, Missouri native, Josh Hawley, received his undergraduate degree from Stanford University and his law degree from Yale. He served as a law clerk for U.S. Appeals Court Judge Michael McConnell and U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. More recently, however, Hawley worked as a law professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia. He's also served as a senior counsel at the Bucket Fund for Religious Liberty. Among conservatives, Hawley is best known as part of the legal team that successfully prosecuted the, quote, Hobby Lobby case, which challenged the mandate in the Federal Affordable Care Act for employers to include contraceptive coverage in the insurance they provide employees. The U.S. Supreme Court sided with Hobby Lobby. Despite never running for office before, Hawley has been able to haul in huge donations for his candidacy, including from TAMKO executive David Humphreys and his family. I believe the Missouri Ethics Commission did drop his the complaint filed against him for the $3.1 million in unsolicited funds from conservative super PACs. Here's what Hawley, as an editorial, not in the article, but here's what Hawley had to say during the show. While he stands by his stinging statement condemning GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump's 2005 comments to entertainment personality Billy Bush, Hawley declined to say whether he is rescinding his endorsement of Trump. Quote, "I am going to let my comments on Friday stand," Hawley said, quote, "and they are my final word on this race, and certainly his comments and behavior, I don't have anything to add to it." Hawley said he's, quote, "leery of automatically making the Attorney General investigate every situation where a police officer kills somebody. That proposal was one of the first recommendations in the Ferguson Commission report, but has been opposed by both Republicans and Democrats. Quote, "I'm very nervous about any situation, any statutory change that would move that authority away from the prosecuting attorneys and therefore the people and centralize it in Jefferson City." Hawley doesn't believe the fact that Hensley has served as an elected prosecutor is a good reason to vote for her. Irrelevant now, I suppose. Prosecuting crime is absolutely hugely important, and that's why we elect our prosecuting attorneys. It is not really what the Attorney General's office does. She does not have the background that is relevant to running the Attorney General's office, which is in federal courts, constitutional law, complex civil litigation, nor does she have inclination to fight the fights that needs to be fought in order to protect Missourians. I would argue that Josh Hawley does not have the inclination to fight the fight against Republic Services for environmental contamination that would protect Missourians and their natural resources. Again, he declined to attend the candidate forum. Josh Hawley also declined all of my requests for interviews and comments and interviewing all of the potential Attorney General candidates prior to the election to publish with an update on our petition to the governor, which we couldn't get past the Democratic governor, so would count it dead against Eric Greitens, who is our new Republican governor. Finally, in the article, it adds that when asked if he would swear off running for any other office besides Attorney General if he wins, Hawley said, quote, "I am running to be Attorney General of Missouri, and that is the job that I want to do. That is the job that I have my sights set on. I'm not running to get this job in order to do this or that or the other thing." I'm assuming that was in the context of governor. A lot of candidates go from from Attorney General to governor. So we'll see in a few years. Also worth noting, our new governor, Eric Greitens, did not attend the Westlake candidate forum. So none of these candidates in key spots are really accountable to any such goals in cleaning up the contamination at Westlake or mitigating the subsurface smoldering exothermic reaction, the fire there. We do not have any odor data to report from the Department of Natural Resources for November. However, the last report from the Department of Health and Senior Services, follow-up review of air monitoring data from Bridgeton landfill area from October 27th to the 31st. DNR reported occasional light and moderate to strong odors at various locations during this time period. DHSS continues to recommend that during periods of objectionable odor, sensitive individuals should stay indoors as much as possible, avoid outdoor exercise, and seek medical advice for any acute symptoms. Symptoms associated with exposure to strong odors include headache, nausea, and fatigue, as well as respiratory symptoms, particularly in asthmatics or other sensitive individuals. Symptoms generally associated with strong odors typically disappear once odors dissipate. Hydrogen sulfide concentrations were below levels of public health concern. Hydrogen sulfide levels are measured by a highly sensitive Jerome meter, which detects hydrogen sulfide specifically. Reduced sulfur compounds were periodically detected by area RAE monitors, but previous sampling has shown that these detections are primarily due to a reduced sulfur compound with strong odor but lower toxicity. Sulfur dioxide concentrations were below levels of public health concern during this time period. Benzene was not detected in ambient air at any of the surveillance locations around the landfill during this time period. There are no health-based screening values for total VOCs. However, total VOC data are used to identify the need for compound-specific sampling. To be proactive, DNR is performing weekly VOC compound-specific sampling in locations upwind and downwind of the landfill. The laboratory results are submitted to DHSS Review of Public Health Concerns, and that analysis is regularly posted online. Average carbon monoxide concentrations were below levels of public health concern. Gamma radiation rates continue to be indistinguishable from natural background levels and were below levels of public health concern. The DNR has updated their data on November 7th, 2016, 2 days ago, for the 4 highest 1-hour sulfur dioxide values year to date. From the, I believe the closest point that they monitor near the landfill, the Ryder Trail near I-170, or near Interstate 70, which began on May 20th of this year. The first highest is 17 parts per billion, second highest 14 parts per billion, third 12, and fourth 11. These values are updated, I believe, on either a weekly or monthly basis. So we'll try to provide those to you as they come in. For those of you in the neighborhood doing research, I'm sure you know, but the administrative record for Westlake Landfill is still available at the Bridgeton Trails branch of the St. Louis County Library, located at 3455 McKelvey Road, Bridgeton, Missouri 63044. Their hours are Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Friday and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday from 1 to 5 p.m. Next week, we have set to come join us on the show Allison Carrick, the other co-director of The First Secret City, to follow up on the interview that we had with Carl and to shed some of her insights. We should be interviewing sometime over the weekend, and look forward to that. Meantime, to finish up our show, I want to share with you one, maybe two pieces if we have time, that Carl Stelzer wrote. that I believe kind of wraps up some of the themes of today's show, and also talks about some of the history of Bridgeton and Westlake landfill and how these situations came about. The story is called "The Ties That Bind." Again, it was written by Carl Stelzer. You can find it at stlreporter.wordpress.com. In 1969, the city of Bridgeton paid more than $200,000 for a 26-acre tract of land, now known as the Bridgeton Athletic Complex, BMAC for short. The beneficiary of the land deal was an investment group headed by the late Kenneth Davis, co-owner of B&K Construction, the company responsible for later dumping tons of radioactively contaminated dirt at nearby Westlake landfill. Foes on the Bridgeton Council then estimated that investors made nearly a 100% profit on the deal, according to Bridgeton City Council minutes uncovered by STL Reporter. Opponents also raised questions as to whether politics played a role in the lucrative transaction. Their suspicions centered on the cozy relationship between then St. Ann Mayor Clarence T. Meyer, one of the other investors in the land deal, and his frequent business partner, Kenneth Davis, co-owner of B&K. T. Meyer was then considered the most powerful municipal leader in North St. Louis County. The Bridgeton land deal transpired during the scandal-ridden mayoral administration of Earl Davis, no known relation to Kenneth Davis. Mayor Davis was indicted in 1969 by the St. Louis County prosecutor for bribing a land developer in a separate scheme. He was acquitted of that charge. The BMAC ball fields became a point of controversy again last year when a group of community activists charged that soil samples indicated the presence of lead-210, a radioactive isotope at the site. Other activists announced their findings in May 2014. Then Bridgeton Mayor Conrad Bowers and EPA officials dismissed the evidence as unscientific and assured the public that the athletic fields were safe for use. Subsequent testing by the EPA confirmed the presence of radiation above background levels at the site, but not exceeding the agency's standard of remediation. Activists countered by disputing the EPA's methods and protocols. Despite the recent attention, the history of the property has been largely ignored. B&K Construction of St. Ann, Missouri dumped the radioactively contaminated materials at the landfill in North St. Louis County in 1973 while working under contract for the Cotter Corp. Of Colorado. Robert and Kenneth Davis, two brothers, formed B&K in 1954. During the long tenure of St. Ann Mayor Clarence T. Meyer, the company maintained a profitable relationship with the city, receiving a raft of contracts for street repairs. In return, Kenneth Davis helped raise money for the mayor and his political allies. T. Meyer and Davis had other close ties too, including sitting on the board of directors of Cherry Hills Country Club and Colonial Bank. The same bank will later be revealed to be the depository of Bridgeton Park Department funds, even though it paid below average interest rates on the money. A report issued by the Atomic Energy Commission in 1970 indicated that B&K employed off-duty police officers to guard the facility, which raises questions as to the possible complicity of local law enforcement in the illegal dumping, which has never been thoroughly investigated. T. Meyer was a political ally of the late Representative Robert Young, who maintained an office in the same strip mall as B&K's headquarters on Cypress Road. Young, a Democrat and member of the politically powerful Steamfitters Union, served in the state legislature before becoming a U.S. congressman. In the early 1970s, press accounts revealed that Irene Young, the congressman's wife, received payments from the city of St. Ann for acting as an insurance agent for the city. During this period, Young's union, Local 562, held sway over politics in North St. Louis County, while its leadership was known to have ties to organized crime. So here we have a better idea of some of the players at work here, and to introduce one more, I will share one last story with you from stlreporter.wordpress.com by Carl Stelzer, entitled Devil on the Rock Road. The EPA website dedicated to the radioactively contaminated Westlake landfill in Bridgeton offers a vague description of the Superfund site, describing it as approximately 200 acres. In that sense, The boundaries of the site are as uncertain as the exact location of the nuclear waste itself. On one hand, the uncertainty is due to the failure of the federal regulatory agency to pinpoint the hotspots. This failure comes despite 40 years of oversight. But there is equal ambiguity related to the history of the impacted properties themselves and their current ownership status. It is a mystery that the EPA and others, including the St. Louis Archdiocese, don't seem to want to talk about. As usual, the devil is in the details, and in this case, the details involve the Catholic Church. St. Louis County land records indicate that the main road leading into the site, as well as more than 20 acres in its interior, are still owned by the Westlake Quarry and Material Company. The church took over quarry operations after the business was bequeathed to it decades ago. Quarry operations ceased years ago, but the corporation itself remains active, and charities tied to the church own the company. St. Louis County real estate records indicate the Westlake Quarry and Material Company is the owner of land inside the EPA Westlake Superfund site in Bridgeton. The quarry company is owned by the St. Louis Archdiocese, but the tax bill is sent to a post office box in Phoenix. In short, the church, in this case, holds the keys not to heaven, but a radioactive waste dump, according to county records. But this is where it gets murkier. Tax records reveal that the tax bill is not sent to the Archdiocese or any other identifiable church entity. Instead, the tax bill is sent to an anonymous P.O. box in Phoenix, the headquarters city of the site owner, Republic Services, a responsible party for the EPA cleanup. Since acquiring the property more than a decade ago, Republic has closed other operations, but continues to use the site as a transfer station. The corporate registration report filed earlier this year with the Missouri Secretary of State's office shows the president of Westlake Quarry as William Whitaker, a retired mining engineer who lives in O'Fallon, Missouri. Attorney Bernard C. Huger is listed as the secretary of the corporation. The same two individuals are now the sole members of its board of directors. Both men say they have represent the church's interests in the company. And Missouri Secretary of State records from this year show the officers and board members of the Westlake Quarry and Material Company are longtime representatives of the Catholic Church. Provides a document with the source for that. After the church was bequeathed the company, it needed a qualified person to run the business. They found me 1,200 feet underground, says Whitaker, who previously supervised a lead mine near Viburnum, Missouri. When he took over, the Westlake Quarry was one of a number of holdings owned by the company. All of a sudden the church, owned a bunch of quarries, and they had nobody to run the operation because the owner who was running it had passed away, recalls Whitaker. They asked me if I would come up and run the operation. I've been in the mining business since 1960. How many years is that? When informed that the company was still on the St. Louis County property tax rolls, Huger expressed surprise and attributed it to governmental error. I think we sold all that, and they don't have the records right. I don't know, but that's a long time ago. I think it's all long since been sold. But a clerk for the St. Louis County Record of Deeds office told STL Reporter that property tax recipients were based on information contained in the property deed, and the quarry company's name appears on the tax bill. The quarry is not operating, but we keep it open just in case anything would come up from time to time, Huger says. There might be some workman's comp case come up. Someone might make a claim that was an employee. We had one of those a couple of years ago. We just kept it open, but it's not really active. It's not doing any active business. Let's put it that way. The current shareholders, quote, are several Catholic institutions, says Huger. He estimates that the business has been dormant for 20 years. I don't know the exact date, but it's been a very long time, he says. At the time the previous owners willed the business to the church, it was a thriving concern. Westlake Quarry and Material Company was a big quarry operator with quarries up and down the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, says Huger. The company had towboats and barges, and corporation records show that the company's barge fleeting operations extended southward to states bordering the Mississippi from St. Louis to New Orleans. Spokesperson for the St. Louis Archdiocese, the EPA, and Republic Services refused to comment. Why Republic Services, a responsible party for the cleanup, is allowed to conduct A profit-making business inside the site remains a matter of debate. While church and state remain mum on the issue, the questions elicited a series of responses at a recent monthly meeting of the Westlake Community Advisory Group, which acts as a liaison with the EPA. Quote, "I don't know if the actual road that goes to the transfer station is part of the Superfund," says Ed Smith of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. "That's not something I've thought about before, so it's possible that the road is not a Superfund site." Matt Levanchi, an assistant chief of Pattonville Fire Protection District, expressed little doubts where lines are drawn. "It is my understanding that areas are impacted by radiologically impacted material are under the oversight of EPA," says Levanchi. "One thing is for sure, while the public remains confused over the issue, Republic trash trucks continue to roll in and out of the site as if they have God on their side." A note about this, I've brought this issue of the transfer station to St. Louis County Council, and I've challenged its credibility on a number of counts, primarily the violation of Clean Air and Water Act regulations on a few accounts, and inquired as to whether that was part of the permitting process. I brought this to St. Louis County because St. Louis County offers a permit to Bridgeton Landfill LLC, which is a subsidiary of Republic Services Incorporated, RSG. Actually, I think the transfer station is under another subsidiary. Either way, it all goes back up to the top. And they didn't have an answer for me. They said they'd look into it, and was never addressed. Now, I found curious that back in June, was it? Early June of this year, when I filed a sunshine request for actually, it might have been earlier in the spring. I filed a sunshine request for public records with the state of Missouri for the water sampling data that was taken after the flood in January of this year. Samples were taken by the state at certain overflow points. Landfill and parts were flooded. So water quality samples were taken off-site and near the Missouri River. I asked for the sample results from those samples, as well as the water quality reports from Missouri American Water at the upstream water plant near St. Stanislaus. And the request was, quote, lost. And I persisted, filed another one. That request came back with an email of the Physor engineering contracts for soil samples, which are freely available online. It's nothing that was not already uncovered. It's also not exactly what I asked for. Nothing really pertaining to the water quality information that I was after. However, I did get the permit from St. Louis County, a copy of the permit from St. Louis County for the Bridgeton Landfill Transfer Station. I found this curious because I didn't ask for it from the state of Missouri. I asked for it from St. Louis County. So obviously there's some cooperation going on there, and they were listening and provided that with me. And the permit for Bridgeton Landfill Transfer Station is in good standing. What I did notice about it is that it nowhere takes into account the compliance of the surrounding site, or of the Bridgeton Landfill or Westlake Landfill, the environmental compliance in terms of whether they're allowed to operate. So my assumption is that because it's technically a separate legal entity, even though it's a subsidiary of the same company, that they're considered an island of their own. In a sense, they're operating in a bubble. The problem is it's not a bubble, and the entire place is a Superfund site. So we've later learned this article, Devil on the Rock Road, I believe was written in 2014, maybe 15. So I did get some answers on that, not necessarily the answers that I requested, but I did find that Bridgeton Landfill Transfer Station LLC is in good operating authority with St. Louis County. It covers things like safety measures and design qualifications of the building, and but again, nothing on environmental impact is considered as part of that operating permit. So I challenged this with the county and never got a response. We have a new St. Louis County Council, some new members on the council, so look forward to engaging with them in coming months. Now in our final stretch, I'd like to discuss the Dakota Access Pipeline, continuing its final and most contested stretch. In an article published November 8th, today at 7:48 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, yesterday, 7:48 p.m. This is from TheVerge.com, written by Rachel Becker. The company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline is preparing to tunnel under Lake Oahe, the body of water at the heart of the protests against the crude oil pipeline. This last phase of construction will join the already completed sections of the pipeline, Reuters reports. The Energy Transfer Partners announced today that drilling underneath the lake will start in 2 weeks despite government agencies' request to wait, according to The Guardian. The pipeline is expected to be completed by the end of 2016, the company says. So now, as reported by USA Today, there are 4 ways that the Dakota Access Pipeline could be halted. 1. Standing Rock wins in court. The tribe filed a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers during the summer shortly after the agency signaled its intent to approve an easement for drilling under Lake Oahe, more than the 200-mile-long reservoir of the Missouri River that stretches from north into south into North Dakota. The tribe asked for an injunction on 2 grounds: that the court failed to adequately consult with the tribe, and that granting the easement would do irreparable harm to tribal history. Parts of the Standing Rock Reservation were already flooded by the creation of the lake in the 1960s. Number 2, the federal government delays or stops the project. Similarly as it did with the Keystone XL project. Number 3, reroutes or delays could endanger the project's financial feasibility. Delays alone could do a major financial damage to Energy Transfer Partners. The company indicated as much in court filings in the Standing Rock lawsuit. Or number 4, Iowa landowners win in court. Most of the attention focused on the Dakota Access Pipeline is aimed at protest camps in North Dakota, but opponents have another front line in their battle against the pipeline: the cornfields and courtrooms of Iowa. The state has its own protests and arrests as well, said former state lawmaker and radio host who opposes the pipeline, Ed Fallon. Pipeline opponents now are using an eminent domain law that Fallon championed in 2006 in hopes of booting Dakota Access from the state. The law says eminent domain can be used only to take property for defined public purposes. Water, electricity, and natural gas delivery are explicitly included in the statute. Crude oil, however, is not. So, in the words of the late great Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize. Thank you for listening today. We'll have more environmental impact reporting next Tuesday. Thank you again.
There's a fire burning, it burns in my heart, it also burns